Seconds, minutes, hours. There's a time for everything. A time to wake up, a time to eat, a time to work, and a time to sleep. Everything within our lives is based on a time. But is there a time for other things? Let me explain. Time is a currency. We spend it every day of our lives. But how are we spending our time? The greatest gift of love we can give each other is our time. Therefore, time we give equals love well spent. Jesus told us that we, the church, are his bride, and he is the groom. In a marriage, we devote our time and attention to each other to deepen the relationship. When we don't invest our time, growth is stifled. Let's think of it like an equation. We understand that no matter how complicated the formula, when we put nothing into something, it still equals nothing. If we do not invest time into our relationships, we cannot expect to see growth. It's like planting a seed, not tending to it, and hoping that it flourishes. In order for our relationships to be vibrant and alive, we need to give our time every day. It's time to make the effort. When we intentionally spend time with those we care about, it not only strengthens the relationship, it strengthens our bond with Christ, because he is the true image of love. Today, let's all just give a little time.
Amen. Well, let's stand together. Brother Ethan's got the screen. Let's sing together. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, heir of salvation, purchased of God, born of his Spirit, washed in his blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect delight, visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Angels descending, bring from above, echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I am my Thanks for Brother Andrew, literally Brother Andrew. Please give him your attention as he leads our Bible study tonight.
Okay, well, like he said, Pastor Ben is gone picking up his family, and Zach's with the team, so you guys are stuck with me. But the good thing about being stuck with me is I'll probably be a lot faster than Pastor Ben. So Pastor Ben was studying relationships, our relationship between God the Father, and this week was supposed to be our relationship with Jesus. But I wanted to hear Pastor Ben preach that message because I was interested in like his thoughts on it and what he had. So I'm going to teach a different lesson. It's on relationships still. My title is going to be, Are You a Friend to God? So during the Bible, we hear God doing these amazing things for these people, mostly the Israelites. God will go and he saves the Israelites from someone. He does this amazing thing. The Israelites will come to him and they'll serve him and they'll worship him. But then something else will come into their life. And they'll wander off from God and they'll stop obeying God and they'll go do their own thing. You guys know the story, but then God will say, you guys need to come back to me or something bad's going to happen. He'll call to them saying, this is going to happen if you don't come back to me. And then he allows it to happen in their life. And then they cry out to him when they're in slavery or they're in bondage or there's enemies upon them. And then God will go save them. This happens, it repeats itself over and over again throughout the Old Testament. But is that actually a relationship with God? Because you see, God, he wanted to have a relationship with the Israelites. He extended his friendship out to the Israelites, but did the Israelites ever accept his friendship? They only wanted God when they needed God. And so I think a lot of Christians, when they get saved, that's kind of the extent of the relationship with God. It's when I need God, that's when I want God. That's when I want to have a relationship with God. So my title is, like, are you a friend to God? We can be a friend of God because God offers his friendship to everyone. But are we actually a friend, like, in return to God? So I just have a couple, it's not going to take me very long. I just want to look at a couple people throughout the Bible who I believe had a relationship with God, a friendship with God, and I believe they were a friend to God. So the first one, which probably won't be a shock to you guys, is going to be Abraham. So Abraham, in James 2:23, I'm not going to read it to you because I don't have my Bible because I left it in Bethany's car and I just have Ethan's. But basically what it says is Abraham's faith and trust in God and his obedience to God was counted to him as righteousness. His obedience, his trust in God was counted to him as righteousness, and he was a friend of God. In John 15:14, Jesus is talking to the disciples, and he says, those who obey my commandments are counted as my friends. So the two things I want to look at in Abraham's life, Abraham, he walked with God and he talked with God, but the two things that I think that stick out in Abraham's life, the two things are his trust in God and his obedience to God. You see, a lot of people say, well, I trust God, I have a relationship with God, I wouldn't be a Christian if I didn't trust God, but how much do you trust God? Let's say Abraham was living in this city, He was living with his family, and God came to him and he said, Abraham, I want you to leave everything and just start walking. See, that would be understandable if God would have said, I want you to go from to Egypt. Abraham was like, well, he knows where he's going, so he started walking. But God just told him to start walking. And he obeyed, and that was his trust in God. I think a lot of Christians, do they actually trust God? I mean, studying this thing, actually, I'm kind of preaching and teaching to myself, because how much do I trust God on a daily basis? How much do I trust God with my future? Do I trust God to just start walking? If God says start walking, do I trust him enough to just start walking? The next thing is his obedience, because when God did tell him to start, he didn't just trust and say, oh, I believe you. He actually obeyed it. Isaac, he obeyed him, and he actually trusted God enough, I think, to raise Isaac from the dead if he actually had to kill him. But he obeyed and he followed through until God told him not to. So I think in order to be a friend to God, we have to have trust. We have to trust God completely, and we have to obey him. The second friend to God, in my opinion, now there's many throughout the Bible, these are just the ones that I'm going to talk about, is Moses. This is actually our key verse throughout our study, 33:11. Basically, God talked to Moses as he would talk to a friend. So God would go to Moses, and he would go up on the mountain, and he would speak to Moses, and then they would sit and they would talk as they were friends. So I want to ask you guys a question you can just think about. When you sit and talk to God daily, if you sit and talk to God daily, because sometimes stuff happens and we just shove God to the back. If you talk to God daily, do you talk to God as a friend? Or here's another question. Can or could God talk to you as a friend in your private prayer meeting? I know a lot of times when we're praying, we get carried away with all the asking and even sometimes we get carried away with the good stuff. Sometimes we get carried away with thanking God. I know that sometimes when I'm praying, I have this list and I just go down and I thank God for all these things. And I think that's really good. But if we get so carried away with what we think a prayer should be, and we don't just, what if every time you talk to your friend, you had a list of topics and that's all you talk to your friend about? You talk to your friend every day, but every time you talk to your friend, it was the same thing. It was about the same stuff. Well, I did this, and I want you to help me do this. Can you do this for me? And thank you for that. That's not a relationship. They're basically a robot. And I think God likes to hear our problems. He does. He likes us to bring our cares to him. And he likes us to thank. He likes us to praise him. But I think in order for us to be a true friend to God, we have to have a true conversation with God. We have to go on a daily basis and talk to him as a friend. And so I think that is the main thing. When God said he talked to Moses as a friend, it wasn't that the other people didn't talk to God. It was that Moses talked to him as a friend. And some of you guys don't need to be talking to God as a friend, because I've heard how you guys talk to your friends. But I don't think that's what he meant when Moses talked to him as a friend. I don't think he was joking, because we're kind of brutal to our friends sometimes. I don't think that's what God meant. I think God meant a trusted friend, a friend that you go to, a friend that you have trust with, a friend that you can tell anything to and they can tell you something. I think that's the friend and relationship that God was talking about. And so the third person I want to look at is Enoch. So he is in Genesis 5:24 throughout that, but it says that Enoch walked with God and he didn't die. Enoch is one of two people throughout the entire Bible who didn't die. So Enoch walked with God daily, and he had such a strong relationship with God that God did not want Enoch to have to go through death. And so he took him up to heaven, or it depends on how you believe there, maybe Abraham's bosom or heaven, and he took him up there. So how is your daily walk with God? Now there's two things I want to talk about Enoch. How is your daily walk with God? How much time do you spend with God a month? So I want you to think back throughout your month, maybe your year. How much time do you separate yourself from your phone, separate yourself from your family, separate yourself from everything, and spend time with God? I don't think when Enoch was spending time with God every single day, I don't think it was a group family meeting. Now, it could have been every once in a while, but it said he walked with God. I'm thinking it was a one-on-one. Enoch walked with God. He talked to God. He had a relationship. He was a friend to God. How long has it been? How many times a month? Most months there's 30 days. How many times, 30 days, do you have alone time with God, where you just are with God? How many times a week do you have alone time with God? How many times a day do you have alone time with God? Daniel prayed 3 times a day. And some of us pray 3 times a day, but it's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I don't think that's really what God's talking about either, because that's just a thankfulness most of the time. When we pray, it's like, rub-a-dub-dub, bless the grub. That's our prayer on breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But I don't think that's what God desires. I think God desires for us to have a relationship. He wants us to tell Him about our problems, thank Him, worship Him, and then listen to what He has to say to us. Now God's not, well, I say He's not going to, this isn't impossible, but I don't believe He's going to speak in an audible voice, but He has ways of speaking to you. And some of you guys have stories about how God has spoke to you in the past, and I believe He still wants to speak to us. And so that's what I'm talking about with the walk. And the next part of the walk is what I'm talking about is, I believe people knew Enoch walked with God. I don't think it was a secret that Enoch walked with God. I don't think it was a secret to his kids, Methuselah, one of his kids, oldest man in the Bible. I don't think it was a secret to him. I don't think it was a secret to his grandkids or his great-grandkids, because I believe Enoch was taken away at 600, so he probably had a huge family at the time. I don't think it was a secret to them, and I don't think it was a secret to his family. So today, is your walk with God a secret? Does people in your work know? Do people in your family know? Do they know how close you are with God? Do you want them to know how close you are to God? Are you ashamed of how close you are to God? And I'm kind of talking to myself too, because when I think about the last month, the last week, even today, how much alone time I really spent one-on-one with God. Have I been a friend to God this month, this week, today? Because honestly, I haven't done very good. Some months are better, some months are bad, but I think to be a friend to God, we must separate ourselves from that and spend quality time with Him. And I believe Enoch did that, and that was one of the reasons God spared him from death. It wasn't a secret to his family. It wasn't a secret to anyone. He trusted God, he walked with Him daily, and God took him up to heaven. I think from Enoch, I think the thing we can take away, we can learn from Enoch is that God wants to have a relationship with us, and He wants to speak with us daily. Amen. The fourth friend of God, this is more of a friend of Jesus, I would say. Those are from the Old Testament. This is the New Testament right here. The fourth friend is John the Revelator. There's Revelations 1:1 is the verse I have for that. All right, and that's basically, Jesus is saying that God entrusted this knowledge to me, and I'm entrusting it to you, John. And God trusted John enough to tell him how the world was going to end, and how in Revelations, all the stuff that is going to come to pass, all the stuff that God knows is going to happen, Jesus knows is going to happen, and they told John what was going to happen. So the thing I think that we can learn from God is, or how we can learn from John is, does God trust us? And you're thinking, how can God trust us? We're sinful people. But that's not what I'm talking about in that area. What I'm talking about is, does God trust you enough to bless you in a certain area of your life? Have you grown enough in a certain area of your life for God to trust you? I think the two ways, how do we earn people's trust? The thing that I thought of is how we earn people's trust is, one, how someone's going to earn my trust is, one, I'm going to spend time with them. I'm going to watch how they're living their life. I'm going to watch how they deal with certain things. And the second thing I'm going to watch for is a test. I might test them with something. Or I might see when they're tested, how they handle it. So my question for you is God testing you in a certain area in your life? And are you passing the test, or are you failing? Because God might want to bless you. And you say, well, if God wanted to bless me, He can bless me. But that's not always, God could bless you, but would it affect your life walk with Him? If God blessed you with $1 million tomorrow, would you still be faithful to God? Would that cause a wedge between you? So today, maybe God's testing you. Can He actually trust you with this blessing? Could He trust you with this knowledge? He trusted John with knowledge that He wouldn't trust to most Christians today, I don't think. Because what if John would have wrote Revelations and changed a couple things? What if John wouldn't have believed all the things he had heard? But he trusted John. John was trustworthy. So I think in order to be a friend to God. You see, we're supposed to trust God, but in my opinion, to be a true friend to God, God has to be able to trust us. There are people that I would, if I had money and I had to go swimming, there are people who I would trust to give my wallet to and say, hey, watch this for me. But there are other people who I would just hide it somewhere because I wouldn't trust them people around my wallet. They're going to go buy some pop, they're going to take my wallet and run. So, is that the way God views us today? Can God trust us with money? Can God trust us with power, leadership? I think we need to evaluate our lives, see what tests we're actually be going through, and how we're living our daily lives because God's watching us. The eyes are on the just, His eyes are on us, His eyes are on everyone. And so I think that's what we can learn from John, the friend of Jesus, the disciple whom Jesus loved. And the fifth, and I told you it was going to be pretty quick, the fifth friend I want to talk about is David. David in Acts 13:22, God says basically, I brought him up and I Saul, then I chose David, a man after my own heart. Now David had many failures. As most of you guys know who have read the books about David, he had many failures, he had many faults, he had many problems. David was by no means a perfect man. But David was a man after God's own heart. You see, the reason, there's a couple, I've heard Brother James will say this a lot, but I think one of the reasons why David was a man after God's own heart is when God would say, David, you're wrong, David would say, God, you're right. You say, David usually didn't argue with God. When God would confront David about his sins, David would confess his friends. Now sometimes David would plead with God saying, don't let this punishment happen. But he never said, God, you're wrong. David would always come and he would confess his sins. And another thing is, David's sins grieved him because he knew they grieved God. When David found out about his sin, it hurt him and it hurt God. I think a couple things we can learn about David is when we do mess up, when we do fail, when our faults get in the way, one, it doesn't have to separate us from God. It doesn't have to ruin our relationship, our friendship with God. It can if we let it, but I don't think it has to. When God confronts us, we have two choices. We can confess or we can turn and we can say, you're wrong, God, I'm in the right. And so the other thing I think that we need to learn, in order to be a friend to God, we have to be upset with the things God is upset with. Let's say you have your closest friend comes to you and their family member, let's say their mom died. They're coming to you and they're crying, they're upset and they're broken, and you're just a straight face and you don't care. They come to you and they're crying, they're broken, and it's not because you're not hurting inside while you're straight faced and you just don't show emotion. It's because you don't care about them. You don't care about their problem. You see, that's not a true friendship, and that person is probably not going to come to you again when they're hurting. They're going to find someone who cares and is going to hurt with them, who's going to cry with them, who's going to grieve with them. And sometimes men, that you don't cry, and that's perfectly fine. I try not to cry either. It's kind of embarrassing. But you have to be there for each other, and it's okay to cry. But what I'm saying is, some things that make God upset, Christians don't even wink an eye at. Churches nowadays, I know our church is very strong on it, but abortion, I think God, it crushes God when these babies are murdered. I think things like homosexuality, and churches sometimes view it the wrong way. I think it crushes God when all our sins, when we lie, when we steal, I think all sins are equal with God. I think sins have different consequences on earth, but in heaven, sins are equal. And so I think every day as we go throughout and we sin and we discard what God, Jesus did for us, and we don't care, I think it should grieve us. And if it doesn't grieve us, are we truly close enough to God? Because when God's heart hurts, our heart should hurt. When God is upset about something, we should be upset about something. You guys who are married, and you women who are married and you have that close relationship with your spouse, when your spouse is upset, you should be upset. When your children are upset, you should be upset. When your friends are upset, you should be upset. So why should that separate with God? Why should that change with the creator of the universe. You see, God offers his friendship to all of these people. Everyone in the entire world who's ever lived and whoever will live, God will offer his friendship to them. But how many people will offer their friendship back to God? And so that's kind of been my thoughts for today is, are you a friend to God? So I think the main things, the challenges that we can look at, the things that I kind of thought is, one, we're going to mess up and we're going to sin because we're all of a sin nature. Now, some of us might mess up more than others. You take David, for example. David messed up multiple times. His sins, most of them were huge sins that caused the nation of Israel tons of hurt or his family tons of hurt. You can take Enoch, for example. It's hard to find something wrong with Enoch. Now, he was of sin nature, so I'm sure he had failures in his life. But he walked so closely to God that he was taken up to heaven. So I think the thing we can learn from these people is we don't have to fail. But if we do fail, God's going to be there, and he wants us to run back to him and confess. So the things, my challenge for you guys and my challenge for myself is to be a friend to God, not of God, to be a friend to God. The thing we learned from Abraham is we must trust and obey God in everything. Not just the things we give to God, not just the things we want God to control. We must trust and obey him in all things. The second thing, a second challenge we learned from Moses is sometimes we don't have to have this long written prayer. Sometimes God just wants us to sit before him and maybe not even speak. Maybe sometimes God just wants to be in silence with us, and maybe God just wants to speak with us as a friend. You don't always have to be talking to your friend. Sometimes you can just be there with them. Second thing is to make sure your walk with God is daily. We learned from Enoch. Sometimes Christians, they go in Sunday, Wednesday, they have a walk with God, but Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, they don't have a walk with God. And our church, we have a smaller church, and we're very foundational. I don't know if we have that problem with the sinning and going out and drinking and all that stuff, but how do we love people on a daily basis? How do we treat other people on a daily basis? Because with Christians, I think that's the biggest problem. It's not that Christians go out and drink every day, that they're not in church. It's not the problem that Christians go out and do these horrible sins that we think are above other ones. I think Christians have a problem of looking down on others on a daily basis, not loving the hurting on a daily basis, not reaching out to those who are in need of our help on a daily basis. And so, in my opinion, Jesus said, how are they going to know you're my disciples? He says, by your love. They're going to know by your love. And so I think if we truly want to be a friend of God, our walk has to be daily with God. The next thing is stay close to him and earn his trust. You got to earn God's trust. If you want God to bless you with money, if you want God to bless you with power, or to bless or other people respect you, I think we have to earn his respect. We have to earn his trust, because if God knows he's going to give us this money and we're going to go and blow it on stuff that doesn't matter and worldly possessions that profit no one, is he going to bless you with that? He might sometimes, but I think for the lying's over here, murder is way over there, and then we got, let's say, just being rude. That's right over here by lying. I think all sin is going to hurt Jesus. All sin is going to hurt God, and I don't think God looks down and says, well, this guy murders someone, so he's going straight to hell. This person just lies, so it's okay. All sin is going to separate us from God, and all sin is going to affect and hurt God. So I think in part, God wants you to earn his trust. And the final thing is, if we mess up, run back to him. Think about the pain that it grieves, think about the pain that it causes God every time we mess up. Every time we fail, every time we let something come in between us and God, the wedge, every time that we decide, well, this doesn't matter, it's just a small sin. Every time we lie, because lying seems like a small sin to Christians. Lying, stealing is still that's a big sin. That's over here. Lying, in order to be a friend of God, we must trust and obey. We must sit and have a talk with God. We must walk with him daily, stay close to him and earn his trust, and run back to him. as soon as we mess up and confess our sins. So that's what I have for you guys tonight. I tried to stay sort of on the topic, but I wanted to hear Pastor Ben's take on the message. So I'm going to